Good evening again. As we begin our gathering, we acknowledge that we are each attending remotely from the homelands of many different tribal nations. I myself am currently on land formerly stewarded by the Upper Skagit people, the Sauk-Suiattle, the Swinomish tribe, and the Inklakatma Band of First Nations. We pay respect to these people past and present. If you at home know the names of the tribes whose land you're currently on, please take a moment and type those names into the chat right now so that other folks can see those names acknowledged. I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and do that. See Duwamish, Nooksack, and Lummi, Wenatchee tribal lands, Coast Salish, Lower Skagit. Great. Again, the Lummi Nation. Coast Salish, Lummi, Puyallup as well, Snohomish, Lummi, and Nooksack. Thank you for typing these in, folks. Muckleshoot, Duwamish. Great. Wonderful. Okay. So NCI's mission, North Cascades Institute's mission, is to inspire environmental stewardship through transformative experiences in nature, or in tonight's case, stimulating poetic experiences live from NCI studios. I want to introduce Rena, and then I will hand things over to her. So, Rena Priest is a poet and enrolled member of the Lummi Nation. She has been appointed to serve as Washington State Poet Laureate from April 2021 to 2023. She is the 2022 Maxine Cushing Gray Distinguished Writing Fellow, a Vaden Foundation Fellow, and recipient of an Allied Arts Foundation Professional Poets Award. Her debut collection, Patriarchy Blues, was published by Moonpath Press and received an American Book Award. She's a National Geographic explorer and a Jack Straw writer. Rena holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College. On a personal note, after hearing Rena read her poem Miraculous, I was enchanted and really tried to find a way that we could work with her. So I and others at North Cascades Institute are grateful and thrilled for Rena to be here with us tonight at the Environmental Learning Center. So I'm going to now hand things over to Rena Priest, everybody.
Thank you for that introduction, Evan. I'd also like to thank Humanities Washington for their sponsorship of the Poet Laureate program. They're actually accepting nominations right now, including self-nominations. So if any of you out there are poets and think that you know someone who would be a great Poet Laureate or would like to yourself be a state Poet Laureate, check it out. You can find the information on the Humanities Washington website. So, Natsia, Ohiloxum, Panasatla, Tiakai, the Hueltana, and the Snatchlamington. Thank you all for coming and joining us here so that I didn't have to talk to the bubble. There are people in the room. It's very exciting. So yeah, I'm just really pleased to join you and share some poems and a few poetry prompts with you this evening. And I'll begin with the poem that I wrote for a show that I'm in. That I do this show. It's 7 songs and 7 stories from Indian country, and it's called Welcome to Indian Country. And we've been on the road now since last May, on and off, and we visited like we've been to Virginia Tech and Dartmouth and Washington Center for the Arts and a few other places. We have some other legs on the tour lined up for next year, but this poem is called Welcome to Indian Country, and that's the show. So this poem appeared in the September issue of Poetry magazine. Welcome to Indian Country. Where is Indian Country? It's everywhere we stand, it's anywhere we dance, it's where the earth loves the feel of our feet. Welcome to Indian Country. What does that mean? It means this is where we lift our voice in song and make a joyful drumbeat so our hearts can sing along. Welcome to Indian Country, this beloved country here, where we honor our ancestors by growing stronger every year, by making laughter the answer that wipes away our tears. Welcome to Indian Country. What does the future hold? In uncertain times,
We reach for words like hope and things we can be sure of, sunrises, beauty, love. Welcome to Indian country. It's everywhere we dance and where the feast is truly grand. Welcome to Indian country. Now give us back our land. So, So that was also written as a land acknowledgement because I sometimes am asked to do a land acknowledgement, and everywhere in the Western Hemisphere is Indian country. If it's habitable and there's water and it's beautiful, we were there first. Okay, and we loved it. We loved it better. So this poem is called The Forest for the Trees, and it was the first poem that I wrote as Poet Laureate before I was actually appointed. Before the official announcement had been made that I was Poet Laureate. I knew, they told me in January, and they said, you can't tell anyone till April. Well, you write a poem in secret and it'll come out right before we tell everybody. And so I said, sure. And they said, okay, will you write a poem about dialogue and democracy? And I went, oh, okay. And so I thought about it a lot, and this is what I came up with. And I feel like it's good right now after just having had the elections and, the kind of division that's happening. The forest for the trees. I have seen a tree split in two from the opposing weight of its branches. It can survive, though its heart is exposed. I have seen a country do this too. I have heard an elder say that we must be like the willow, bend, not to break. I have made peace this way. My neighbors clear-cut their trees, leaving mine defenseless. The arborist says they'll fall in the first strong wind. Together we stand. I see this now. I have seen a tree grown around, a bicycle, a street sign, and a chainsaw, absorbing them like ingredients in a great melting pot. When we speak, whether or not we agree, the trees will turn the breath of our words from carbon dioxide back into air, give us new breath for new words, new chances to listen, new chances to be heard. So we only have a chance if we look to the trees and of course the oceans, where is it like 50% of the world's oxygen comes, or 80%, I think, a lot anyways. So, we don't get a democracy without trees and oxygen. But I think that's a key issue that we can hopefully worldwide come together on. So being here in this beautiful place, I had a lineup set, but I think I might deviate a little bit from that and try different. Well, I guess since we're on the topic of, no oxygen, no democracy. I'll read this poem. It's the title poem from my collection that I'm working on right now. The collection is called Dancing to the Ticking of the Doomsday Clock. And as Indigenous people, when we're dealing with a really hard problem, we sing and dance and express, a prayer for strength to face it. And so that's where the title comes from. But the doomsday clock, if you don't know, it's a device. It's a metaphor that scientists have given us. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have given us to think of kind of where we're at in time as a species, what we're looking at. And they adjust it every year for the threats facing humanity. And in 2018, we were at 120 seconds to midnight. Now so that was 2 minutes to midnight. Now we're 100 seconds to midnight. So this poem is called The Doomsday Clock. At 100 seconds to midnight, the revelry is dazzling. We are all enchanted and enchanting with our fiery delusions of the glory of man. Oh, how we dance like no one is watching, because they're not. Oh, how we dance like it's the end of the world, because it is. The doomsday clock now says 100 seconds to midnight, and still the party is blazing. Some species are waning. Several others have gone. But we're still here, now grown to 8 billion strong. Will our neighbors be glad when the clock strikes 12 and our hot mess is quelled, allowing them to carry on undisturbed in their own meek and beautiful business? Will they miss us? So yeah, it's a fun one. Let's do the writing exercise now. We'll just kind of break things up a little, yeah? So the first thing that I do, since we're talking about clocks, the first thing that I do is a series of sprints, and we'll do an abbreviated version of what I normally do. I call them sprints because I set the timer for 5 minutes, and we just do a free write, and that's low stakes, and it's just like, I'm not trying to write a poem here, I'm just trying to do a free write on this topic. So the first thing I want you to do a free write on is to write about a natural phenomenon that puzzles or astonishes you. So a natural phenomenon that puzzles or astonishes you. And, people will write about just anything, lightning. Someone wrote about their hair growing. Someone, all kinds of things, frogs, mushrooms, whatever you find just astonishing. Light, the way that light behaves, it's kind of an interesting natural phenomenon.
When we write it, we don't have to speak it out loud, right?
No, you don't have to speak it out loud. No.
All right.
No, I don't know. I don't think we'll do a sharing portion just because that's a hard thing for the folks at home. But, this is for you and you can take it and to try to, have a poem from it later. So I'm going to set the clock for 5 minutes and we're just going to do a sprint. So ready? And I don't know what we'll do with the camera here. I guess maybe,
I can turn it off.
oh yeah, I guess we'll turn off the camera, but we'll be back, okay? So you folks at home, we'll run the slideshow, I guess, maybe. Anyway, so here we go. Ready, set, go. few seconds left. We can come back a little early too. How was that for everyone? Oh, I see some folks still writing. Okay, finish up your thoughts. And that's 5 minutes. How'd that feel? Okay, cool.
How about folks at home? How'd that go?
Good. All right. So one of the fun things that I did as, during my term as poet laureate is I developed a curriculum with the University of Washington's program Riverways that serves, I think, 17 rural communities throughout the state. And the curriculum, it was called A Poem is a Possibility. Hoping to share that, if writing is thinking and you can edit your writing, you can edit your thinking. And so poems are just full of, everything's like a total possibility. And I was delighted to see this book here in the library tonight. Kind of fun. This is the poetry section over here. But I just kind of was like glancing and I recognized this book by a dear friend. He wrote it for his 60th birthday. It's 60 Poems by Jim Bertolino. And this book is now 20 years old, which is shocking. But this poem is called Grammar. There are passages where this universe, like an ungrammatical construction, fails. The rules fails the rules, yet shapes a quirky beauty, preparing a new template for life. So, it's kind of fun how that's, I love it, the idea that, the world is made of grammar and just, miss a comma and just keep blazing on through. Anyways, so a poem is a possibility. And this next exercise is going to kind of demonstrate, you're going to put that into action. So you're going to choose one sentence from the free write that you just did. So just find one sentence, maybe something that sounds really good and bears repeating. And then you're going to shift it 5 times or a few times, as many times as you can in the next 5 minutes. And I'll give an example of that. So this poem is written somewhat with this in mind. So it's called Before Clocks, and it's looking at what keeping time was before we had clocks, right? So before clocks, to keep time meant music, the steady rhythm of a beat, the playful plucking of a string, the full throb of a drum sounding to the steps of feet. To keep time meant stillness, the steady passing of a day, no need for rush or delay in the fluid timeline of one's own way. To keep time meant tides, the waxing and waning of the moon, the easy pace of later and soon, the warmth of the sun declaring high noon. To keep time meant seasons, the rippling rings of a tree, the changing disposition of the sea, the migration of harvests leading us to where we need to be. And it always happened right on schedule. So to think about something from your free writing that, you want to take one sentence that bears repeating and that you can do like a lot of different things with. So shifting it around and just holding it up to a different way and a different way and a different way and seeing what angles are on it, So we have this idea of keeping time being clocks, but there are all these other ways of keeping time, by the moon, by the tides, by the seasons, by stillness, how it feels when you're writing versus when you're driving or rushing somewhere, So there's a lot of different ways to look at everything, and that's what we're going to do. So take your one sentence and we'll start the timer and we'll go for 5 minutes. So, and you can find your sentence and see what you can come up with. Ready, set, go. And finish up your thoughts. And we're back. So how was that? Did you find some different, different ways of looking at your chosen sentence topic? Cool. All right. Well, so it's kind of fun. Poetry offers this door into seeing things in different ways. Keats calls it negative capability. The poet's ability to engage with the world without, as he says, irritable grasping toward fact and reason, which I love. So this poem, Tour of a Salmonberry, kind of comes maybe out of an assumption like that. So a story that is told every year at salmonberry season. Tour of a Salmonberry. A salmonberry is a luminous spiral, a golden basket woven of sunshine, water, and birdsong. I'm told that the birds sing so sweet because of all the berries they eat, and that is how you can have a sweet voice too. In my native language, the word for salmonberry is alila. In Sanskrit, lila means God plays. Salmonberries sometimes look that way. Every year they debut, spectacular in the landscape, rubus spectabilis, meaning red sight worth seeing. Each druplet holds a seed and the shimmering secret kept by rain of how to rise, float above the earth, feel the sun, and return. So the thing that we're told every year is that, my mom recounts the story of how when she was a girl, her favorite grandfather always told her that if you ate a lot of berries, you'd have a sweet voice. And so every year at salmonberry season, this story is recounted and I kind of love it, but it's a tradition. So anyway, I did not know this, but oh, thank you. The word druplet. So if you look at a berry, all those little globes on a berry, they're called druplets. I love that. Ew. There's a word for everything, and I love it. All right, so this poem, a poem is a naming ceremony. It kind of looks at how what we call something impacts how we feel about it, right? What has grown out of what has gone away? The clear-cut patch has grown larger on the mountain. The rivers have grown murky with timber trash, and there's enough runoff cow manure to grow corn out there on the tide flats. I don't want to think about what has gone away. I want to meander and play and forget myself until I can grow a new me in place of all this grief. Learn the language to see the cottonwood as Quayalach each, the dancing tree, the killer whales as Quahomichan, our relatives under the sea. The whole glorious landscape filled with meaning to end my grieving. When I was young, I was invited to learn Quilnuchkin, the people's language. But I said no, I didn't understand. I thought I wanted to learn how to be rich. I didn't know that the only way to possess all the wealth of the world is by naming it. Here is birdsong. Here is the kiss of a lover. Here is the feel of cold water at the peak of summer. I have spent my life with words trying to name a hint of what I lost by not learning my language. Estitumsin, hutatissin, estitumsin. Those last three words are, I'm doing my best, I'm still learning, I'm doing my best. Yeah, it's really been very interesting trying to learn my language. I speak it with an English accent, which is just, probably sounds terrible, but, this is just the world we live in now. Anyhow, it really does open the door to a new way of seeing things, which is a very old way of seeing things. So a new way to me, but very old for me. Before everyone else got here, I was visiting Amparo. We were visiting and I was talking about how I didn't know that, I didn't really have a concept of how connected we are across the border. I mean, I kind of knew, like in theory, like, oh yeah, you know, we have relatives up there, that border that's a fake border, that's not real. But I didn't really kind of understand until I went up there this summer and we were doing a program with Saanich, and they had their 13 moons laid out on the floor. And I recognized the names of the moons in their language, which is Sanchasan. And Lummi speaks a dialect called Chlumichasan. So with Saanich, Sanchasan, Lummi, Chlumichasan. But they're very similar, and I could read their words. And this elder was telling the story. He said, yeah, you know, that if you look at the map at the islands, you could just get in a canoe and be in Lummi territory in a day. And I looked, and you know, historically where the village sites were, it's just right there. But they said, you know, the elders said, you know, we teach things now. I don't know why why we teach these things and not these other things, because, you know, what they used to teach is how to read the tides so that you could get in the canoe and just shoot on over to see your relatives or do trade or whatever you need to do down there. No power, you know, just muscle power and the tides, it would take you. And we don't teach that necessarily. It's not common knowledge anymore, right? It would have been common knowledge like who the first president was back in the day. You would know. You watch the tide, and when it does that, it's time to go, right? So anyway, that was beautiful. And I also didn't understand how tides worked, not really, until I read Scott Ferry's book that just came out, The Long Blade of History, I think it's called. And he has a poem in there about explaining how tides actually work, which is that the water doesn't move, the earth rotates. There's always like a little bulge of water facing the moon, and we move. Like, I don't know why I didn't I never, you know, put two and two together. But here's a poem that talks about that. It's called The Glimmer. So this is more negative capability, okay? This is poetry without irritable grasping toward fact. From darkness, the idea of self, water, a soul, blood, a body, a brief victory over death by making breath. Thoughts and actions in a series of moments expressed, a cup filled with bliss in the movement of breath, pulling itself into emptiness, water between stones, disappearing, how quickly it goes. I leave with my breath, I return with my breath, and I understand the tides. They are spun in currents by the exchange of breath. For kisses branded on flesh, we claim each with each, join names to our tongues, weld our memories to breath. In our chests, each moment dies for the next, singeing shut the spaces between each allotted breath, smelting our lives first into glitter, then into ash in this breathtaking glimmer above death, where we make breath. So yeah, that's how are we doing on time? Okay, we got a little bit of time. Maybe we'll do a couple more and then open it up for a Q&A. Yeah, so poem that Evan mentioned, Miraculous, I'll share that one. And this came from actually when I have the prompt of a natural phenomenon that puzzles or astonishes you. So the girl who wrote about hair, I was like, I know a fact about hair that she didn't write about. And then I was asked if I wanted to submit a poem to the Yellow Medicine Review's issue that was coming out in May, and it was on the theme of miracles. And I was like, okay, I got one for you. Okay, miraculous. The math has been done. The fact of your existence is 700 trillion to 1. More or less, you've played the cosmic slot machine and won. Struck the freaking jackpot, my friend. So are you a miracle? Yes, I'd say so. But I'd also say that remembering to put out my recycling on Wednesday is a miracle of equal magnitude. Or is it Tuesday? We must not be narrow in our definition of a miracle if we are to lead miraculous lives. The body believes in miracles. When you get goosebumps, it's the feeling of your body trying to grow hair really, really fast so that you don't get cold. Your body loves you. We'll attempt a miracle to make you comfortable. If you can happen and I can happen and we're all just mostly songs and bent light, then it stands to reason that hunger and war and all that difficult history and your heartaches and more can be eased by merciful, miraculous softness, right? So that fact about 700 trillion to 1 is based on some mathematicians getting together and trying to figure out like what the odds are of any individual's existence. And that's what they came up with. And then another mathematician was like, no, you didn't take into account like each individual ova or sperm, like you have to put those in there too. And so it's actually like if a gajillion people, I can't remember the actual numbers, but just theoretical, right? Like a gajillion people got together and they like rolled a gajillion sided die and everyone came up with the same exact number, then that's actually the odds of any one of us existing, which is kind of amazing. Makes me think of that that ending sequence. If you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, have you seen it? It's so good. If you haven't, you should watch it. It's amazing. But that, oh, well, I guess I can't talk about the ending sequence. Some people might not have seen it, so just watch the movie and let's just say the ending sequence is miraculous, like talking about the miracle, right? So beautiful. All right, so we'll do one more, I guess, and then we'll have some questions. This one is called Beach Fire. And it's in my new book called Beaches, Northwest Know-How Beaches, out on Sasquatch Books. That was a fun project. I said no to a project that was less fun. And I was like, why did I do that? And then the next day, Sasquatch Books got in touch and said, do you want to visit all of these beaches and write a book about it? I was like, yes, that's why I said no to that other project. Okay, so this is Beach Fire. Measure wealth by how well you enjoy the hours, fluttering by in praise of sunshine and the ocean breeze, whispering love songs across waves that kiss the beach. This wealth takes work and absolutely no work at all. Fluttering by in praise of sunshine and the ocean breeze, don't mistake leisure for laziness. This gratitude is rigorous. This wealth takes work and absolutely no work at all. This gift of a moment to be alive, to feel at peace. Don't mistake leisure for laziness. This gratitude is rigorous, to be filled up and satisfied by a day at the beach. This gift of a moment to be alive, to feel at peace. It means your heart fire flames a lovely heat, to be filled up and satisfied by a day at the beach. You could toast marshmallows by that warmth. It means your heart fire flames a lovely heat. The glowing embers, a boundless source of power. You could toast marshmallows by that warmth, whispering love songs across waves that kiss the beach. The glowing embers, a boundless source of power. Measure wealth by how well you enjoy the hours. So that poem, there was a room in the manuscript after I delivered the manuscript. They said, well, we want the books to be uniform because it's part of a series, Northwest Know-How series. And they said they all have to be the same size. And we actually have room because we, squeezed a lot on your pages. And so I do want to write some poems. I was like, heck yeah. So all the poems in that book are pantoums because the pantoum structure, if you're a poet, you want sound to echo sense, right? You want the form to fit what you're saying. And when you go to a beach, the thing that you notice is the waves, the repetition, the constantly, any beach everywhere. And so I thought, well, pantoums have that, and they're circles, right? They kind of circle, the sound circles back. So all the poems in there are pantoums. And this poem actually is a little bit inspired by, there's a movie, it's called Return of the River, about the removal of the Elwha Dam. It's a documentary. And there's a story in there about the man who was given the homestead that the dam was built on, and his journal is in there. And when he first encountered that spot on the river where the dam was built, he talked about how beautiful it was and how satisfied and filled up he was by the beauty of the place, and how he could never imagine ever wanting anything in his life ever again besides that beauty in that moment. And when you're out in nature and you're engaging with you know, what's all there in the world to have freely, you feel that way. You feel that abundance. You become one with that abundance. And then I thought, gosh, I wonder if he ever felt, you know, he sold the, well, he actually, I think he instigated the project for the dam so that he could have, like, I don't know the exact, I'll have to watch the movie again, but, you know, sold the rights for the dam to be there. And I wonder if he ever felt that way again, that feeling of richness that he had in the moment that he came to the place and felt it in its pristine state. So just kind of to think about how we measure wealth, and how you feel versus what you may or may not think you want, I guess. Anyhow, so I'll close that part of this with that. Although if it occurs to me through one of your questions to read another poem, I'd be happy to do that. But open it up for questions. Yeah.
We have one question queued up in the chat, so I'll just read that from the chat. Folks at home can hear me on the microphone, so they'll hear the question and then they'll get to see you answer that.
Okay.
The question is, oh, well, first there's a request to please read another poem, but maybe we'll come back to it, unless you'd like to do that.
Oh, we could come back, or
Sounds like maybe one will.
Okay, yeah.
So the question is, thanks so much for sharing about how to read the tides and how we don't learn this anymore, and how you could just get in the canoe and go visit relatives. It makes me think about all the things my grandpa, who never went to high school or college, knew, and I didn't learn from him. What else do you think you or we should have learned from our grandparents?
I think like, okay, so a system of values around, like, I wouldn't even say it's conservation. It's just a system of values that treasures and cherishes the natural world, right? Like it holds it sacred, I guess. Sacred, that's what I'm thinking of, right? What we're taught is that we're in a, like in, I won't say we because it kind of lumps everybody together, but like Western culture is based on a spiritual belief, a hierarchy that places mankind underneath this, you know, there's a male god and he's watching us. And then there's people. And then the male god said, go forth and be prosperous and have dominion over all living things, all the birds of the sky and the creatures of the sea. Subdue nature. He says it's in the Bible, right? Subdue nature and be prosperous. And so that is the directive from, you know, that is kind of like informing Western society, the belief system that has informed the way that the world has developed into what it is now. And it's very different than Indigenous beliefs, which acknowledges that, you know, that things are interconnected and that what happened, what you do here impacts something over here. And you know, it's just a very different belief system, interconnection versus the hierarchy. And I wish that that belief system were taught. So maybe I'll read a poem. Let's see. Okay. There's a couple of my poems that talk about this, but this one, it's maybe a little bit controversial, whatever. Another thing too is that Indigenous belief systems were suppressed, and it did not become legal for us to practice these belief systems until 1978, when Jimmy Carter signed into law the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act. So until then, you know, if your custom told you that you had a spiritual obligation to harvest something, elk, fish, whatever, at a particular time of year to honor that, like to honor your place in that cycle, and you went out and you did that, and you did it without a license, for example, then, you know, you could be taken to jail, you could have all of your gear confiscated, you could have your children taken away, and this happened. Have your children taken away and never see them again. And, you know, it was still legal to burn down ceremonial homes and confiscate spiritual objects, which are a lot of those are in museums. So there's this tradition in this country of Christian supremacy, and it's not addressed, and it's now threatening a lot of rights, including the rights of nature. But this is called Miracle of the Fishes. I don't want to get into a thing where we're arguing about whose spiritual hero is better, but salmon are more powerful than Jesus. All salmon are born from virgins. Actually, they're born right up out of the earth. Female salmon lay eggs in a riverbed. The males come and fertilize them. No male-female contact is made. How chaste. Young salmon make their journey to the sea, then return to perform the miracle of the fishes. They spawn and die in their nutrient-rich bodies, and blood infused with minerals of the living sea feed all living beings in the salmon's natal stream. A salmon needs only itself and its journey to perform this miraculous feat. This beautiful and holy communion between salmon and all living things has been happening for longer than people have been on this planet. On the other hand, basic transubstantiation requires a priest, a church, an altar, a tabernacle, an altar boy, a glass of wine, a tray of wafers, a bell, a forest for a Bible, a dogma, an initiated congregation, the Spanish Inquisition, a history of burning women as witches, a history of stealing and starving Indian kids, a history of holy wars, a history of displacing and murdering heathen Indians in the name of God in order to propagate a story about a boy born from a virgin whose body and blood we eat and drink so we shall be saved. Saved from what? Not from hunger or thirst, but from everlasting damnation in the burning pits of hell, which if I close my eyes to visualize, looks suspiciously like hunger and thirst on this broken and burning earth. So I wish we learned to love the earth like we love Jesus, okay? Let's just say that. That's what I wish we learned.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you, Rena.
Thank you.
We have another question here. This comes from Saul and Shelley Weisberg. Thank you for your wonderful, powerful salmon poem.
Thank you.
Saved from what indeed? Actually, I got a little mixed up here. The question comes from before that, from Vivian. Thank you so much for your reading. What did your journey to publishing poetry look like?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't send poems for a long time. Like I sat on my poems and I didn't share them, and I would go do readings, you know, because I love being in community with other poets. And so I would go to these open mics, or like to my friend Jim and Anita, they would have like poetry salons on their property. But I'd give these readings and people would say, where can I find your poems? And I'd be like, nowhere. They're not. No, I don't send my poems out. But this happened enough that I wanted to have something to give to people when they asked that. And I did like I got a fellowship from the Center for Book Arts when I was finished with graduate school and I was living back in New York. And so I learned how to make these little hand-bound books. And my grandma had also given me a book on how to do this. And so, and I also knew how to screen print. So I had all of these screen prints that, you know, in stacks, and they were imperfect, but, you know, I was like, what am I going to do with these? So I started using them for covers and selling the books at poetry readings when people asked if I had books, or giving them away, whatever. And so at one of the salons at Jim and Anita's, I met my publisher, and she was like, these are great. Do you have any more of these poems? Because it was Patriarchy Blues. And I was like, oh yeah. And she said, do you have enough for a manuscript? And I said, yeah. And then she said, well, will you send it to me? And then of course, like agony, because I was like, oh my God, I have to share my poems. Like this is the possibility that they could be published like here. So I took my little manuscript here and it shrank and shrank and shrank because, you know, like the editor, like, oh, people can't see this. But then I finally got it to where I was like, okay, I'll share these ones. And I sent it to Lana Ayers from Moonpath Press, and she published it. It was very exciting. And then she nominates for awards. So I got, you know, the American Book Award. And then after that, it was like, okay, well, this book's out in the world. So then the second one was much easier, and so on. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, full question. And then this is an easy one. What was the title of that last poem?
That was The Miracle of the Fishes. And that also is in the Yellow Medicine Review, the May issue, the miraculous issue. Yeah.
Well, interspersed between the questions is a ton of accolades.
Oh,
I
thank
love
you.
just closing my eyes and deeply envisioning your meaningful poetry.
Thank you.
Here's one equally eloquent. Oh my God, thank you so much. Smiley face. Actually, it was OMG.
Awesome.
And then a two-parter from Sol and Shelley Weisberg. Number one, do you find yourself writing more or less now that you're poet laureate? Let's just start with that one.
Yeah.
Writing more or less as poet laureate.
I write a lot, but different things now. Yeah. So maybe less of my creative work and more of my correspondence work. But you know, it's a very special time in my life, and there'll be lots of time for writing again for April.
The second part to that question is, I know you've been visiting Native communities throughout Washington. What's that been like for you and for the kids you're connecting with?
So it's been really great. Yeah, just really great. Yeah. The early part of COVID, I didn't really get to do, I connected virtually a lot. And so that was, I just kind of was hopeful that, you know, what I was doing was making an impact. And then when it came time to actually be in person, then you know, I could feel how that might be landing. So that was really nice. So, yeah.
And actually, I had a question I wanted to ask, kind of connected to that. So you've been traveling around a lot as poet laureate, and I was curious, what are some of the ways you've seen your work perceived, and what has that meant to you as a poet?
So I feel like I'm glad that people laugh when it's time to laugh. That's always really nice. Because a lot of the poems have heavy stuff, and I always worry that, like, you know, it'll just kind of, I don't want people to feel heavy about the things in the poems, because in order to address some of the harder things that face people and the poems deal with, we have to be able to like go forward with like hope and optimism and strength, right? And so I'm happy that people usually, that they seem to leave my readings feeling good, like uplifted, hopeful, I think. And that makes me feel really good, because I always kind of worried, again, like when it was like deep COVID, and I was just kind of talking to the little bubble on my laptop, like I had no way. People would say thank you and the nice things that would show up in the comments. It was always really nice, but it's way different when you feel the energy of like the people in the room. You're like, oh, okay, this is good. It's good. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned laughter, and I've often wondered when I read your poetry, which oftentimes is really funny. As a poet, do you strategically use humor to create a tone in your poem to help it land with folks, or do you sometimes start with a joke?
Well, I think actually, so in poetry, I deal with kind of like how not to sugarcoat things, right? Like, because you want to be honest in your work. And so there's this, it just kind of happens. And actually, when it works best, it's completely by accident. But there's a quote by the guy who wrote, Michael Cunningham, who wrote The Hours, and I can't remember it directly, but he says something about how humor is what happens when you're given the truth more directly and quickly than you're used to getting it. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So that's why like the first poem that I read, Welcome to Indian Country, when I say, now give us back our land, right? You're not expecting it because you're kind of going along. And they teach you this in graduate school too, is like you put your dark image up next to your light image, and then it makes them both more powerful. So like in The Miracle of the Fishes, it's, you're going along and you're having a good time. We're just talking about salmon here, folks. And then next thing you know, we're like deep in the darkness of like the aftermath of Christianity. And so that I think is, well, these things, they're done intentionally, but it's kind of going along with the more directly and quickly than you're used to. So if you're setting up your reader to go along thinking that it's one thing, and then you turn on them, which in poetry, by the way, is called a volta. It's Italian for turn, and it's always in a sonnet. At the end, the first 8 lines say one thing, and then you get to the volta, and then the last 6 lines say a whole nother thing, and then the couplet puts a little bow on it, and at the end. But yeah, so it's something that I like to use in poems, or maybe it just kind of happens kind of unconsciously because poetry is an exploration of thinking, and contradictions. We're complex beings. There's one way and the other. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes, right? That's Whitman. But yeah, if you look at one thing and then look at it a different way, it's jarring. And so then it's funny because you're like, whoa, it's both. Trippy. That's great. Yeah.
You see that in Japanese poetry as well. A theme is introduced and then developed, and then a completely unrelated theme is introduced suddenly. And then the last part of the poem resolves that introduction of those 2 unrelated themes. It's shocking, sometimes in a humorous way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to some audience questions. Thanks for your answers.
Yeah.
Have you read poems to members of your nation/community? So I'm assuming that the question is asking, have you read poems to Lummi folks?
Yeah, I have. I haven't actually done like a show there yet, though. I'm going in January. I'm very excited. I've done some classroom presentations there, and the questions and the feedback was great. But I'm excited to be in front of a live audience. I was asked to write a poem for Squamish, which is our annual water festival, and Squamish means warrior. And so normally it was started to honor the veterans coming home from World War II. And so I thought, well, what do I want to write about this? And now there's different ways to be warriors. And so I wrote the poem kind of honoring people in the community that are kind of trying to uplift the community through doing what they love. So, but yeah, I haven't done like a big thing yet in person, just online. Yeah.
Okay, any questions from our studio audience here at the moment? Couple? Empire?
What gives you an inspiration? Nature, politics, or what gives you an inspiration that you're writing the poems?
Let me repeat that question.
Mhm.
So the question we got from our studio audience here, I keep calling it studio audience.
I like it.
Where do you get your inspiration? Is it from nature? Is it from politics? Yeah.
Or anything.
Or anything else? Anything particular?
Yeah, it's all of the things. It's a lot. I usually I learned this. This was cool. I was trying to write for journalism, do journalism writing. How does that work? Anyway, so I was watching a lot on how to do that. And they have this thing in journalism, which they say you're trying to either create heat or light. So you're trying to raise feelings about a particular issue, or you're trying to shed light on a particular issue in journalism. So a little backstory on what they're trying to do there. And it's kind of like that, if I feel a particular thing where if it's just something that just irritates me, or just feel like I want to just understand something more deeply and talk to people about it. This is a way of doing it, is I write poems about it. And then on the other hand, so that's generating heat, right? And then to generate, I guess that's generating light. Yeah, you want people to know about it, so you're trying to shed light on it. Or maybe poetry is both even, right? And so heat. And then other times where I am like just living my life and I experience something so beautiful and I'm like, oh my God. Or amazing, like the thing about the hair that actually came home with my daughter from her 5th grade science class. Her teacher would give them fun facts of the day or of the week. And that was one of the fun facts. And she was like, Mom, did you know that when you get goosebumps, your body's trying to grow hair? I was like, what? Okay. And so, I was like, maybe I put a little pin in that somewhere in my mind. And I was like, maybe that should be a poem someday. And then after that, the student or in the workshop participant shared about her natural phenomenon being hair. And I was like, she doesn't know this. So I was like, people should know this. And so that was light, generating light. So I don't know. It comes from everywhere. Poetry is everywhere. Just pull it out of the air. Thank you.
I think we have another question over here.
Yeah.
I think the State Clock poem kind of was a catalyst for this one, but it seems like it's pretty chaotic world, more so now than ever before. I've only been here for a little bit. And it seems like being able to focus the mind enough to effectively convey not just words, but an emotion within them could take a presence of mind that requires maybe separation from that. And I'm wondering if you have a particular place that's just an individual place rather than a bunch of places that you can go to find that kind of solitude away from all that.
I'm going to repeat that question.
Yeah.
So the question from audience here is, do you have a place where you can go retreat to where you're less vulnerable to the chaos of the world in order to write? Is that great? Cool.
I don't have a particular place. I like my couch at the middle of the night. The middle of the night is the place, I think, because everyone else is asleep. But really, I used to write on trains a lot when I lived in New York, when I was going to school. That's a great place to write. And people wouldn't think that that was very serene. But you can't do anything else. Like your phone doesn't work because you're underground. And there's a lot of entertaining people doing and saying interesting things around you. And so like I would eavesdrop and I would write a lot on trains. But I feel like also poetry, it's being in the world as much as getting away from it. Yeah. And as far as the thing, people often ask, like, how do you remain hopeful in the face, or how do, in the face of like knowing like what we're up against? And the response is that we don't know what's going to happen next. And the metaphor of the clock is so perfect, because until 1855 or something like that is right around treaty time. So the Washington treaties were signed in 1854 and 1855 in the winter. And it was right around the same time, I know this because it was right around the same time that like Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson were writing, and they changed everything about poetry, right? These American poets. And it was also around the same time that time was synchronized worldwide. Before that, it was like something for the astronomers. They kept time, they shot a cannon at what was noon in wherever they were at every day. And it was for the ships, it was for like trade routes. And also trains were set by a clock, but they were different in every place. So, it wasn't synchronized. And now look, we live our lives by it. Now we have like worldwide, you go somewhere else, and then you still have the correct time. It shows up here, right? You go to a high school anywhere in the United States, and they're up at that bell and they're off to their next thing. They live by the bell. I've noticed this in visiting high schools. But like, it was just a couple generations ago, right? Like, so just a few hundred years ago, that was not even a thing. And then the technology together with the impulse or the need or, the wish for this new way of like keeping time came about. And then now here we all are. But it changed just like that. And it could change again. We have a need. We need something to help us with, the many challenges we're facing, climate crisis and everything else. And we have a lot of technology. If our need can align with the technology, who knows what can happen, right? So that's how I stay hopeful. That's the quiet place I go to when I'm really having a hard time. So, yeah. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you, Theo. Okay, another one from our at-home audience. This question is, Rena, how would you describe how your poetry has changed or evolved from your early published work to now? There's a second part to that. Also, can you say what your current writing goals are?
Yeah.
And there's a third part too.
Okay.
I can repeat these.
Yeah.
What would you like to take on, in quotes, or what are you interested in writing more about? So again, the first part is, how would you describe how your poetry has evolved from early days till now? What are your writing goals and what would you like to take on in your writing?
Yeah. So the writing has evolved. Like now I know what I'm, so when I was writing Patriarchy Blues, those were all a bunch of individual poems. I didn't really know what they were about until I had the title. And I was like, oh, okay, that tied it all together. And that's, and then the poem or the collection became what it is. But now I feel like I get to that place a lot quicker now, like when I'm in a project and I'm like, what is this going to be? It's like that for long enough. The mystery is there for long enough for me to be engaged. And then I feel like there's a little shift, like when I understand what it is, I feel like getting to that shift it comes a little easier now. My writing goal is to be able to finish this collection and have it published. I feel like it's all there. It just needs to be organized and sent out to a few more places. And then I think when I work with an editor, then it'll really kind of, and then also I want to collect the nonfiction that I have been working on over the years. And maybe write some nonfiction to accompany a lot of these poems, because I did a panel discussion with Lucy Tapahanso a few weeks ago, and I asked, what was the motivation for submitting the poem that because I collected an anthology of Native Arts and Cultures Foundation awardees and or their fellows, and she was one of them. So I asked her what prompted her to send me the poem that she sent, and she had this amazing backstory for it. And I was like, oh my God. And I thank God I asked that question, because I would have never known. But so much of like, the poem is the tip of the iceberg, right? And I feel like it would be cool to write essays, kind of like expanded Haibun, right? To write essays about the poems. And where they come from, because a lot of these poems in the new collection have a lot of history attached to them. Not my history, but like they're rooted in place. So the history of the fishery, the canning industry, the thing about Jimmy Carter passing the law in 1978 and what came before that. So there's a lot of that that these poems only scratch the surface of. So I'd like to maybe take that on, but that's big. So it freaks me out when I think about it. So thank you for the question.
Any other questions in the room here? Good. Okay, that also takes care of the questions that were in the queue there. Did you want to respond to that request to read one more poem?
Sure, yeah, I'll read some more poems. And this goes till 7, yeah?
Yeah, it goes till whenever it feels natural.
Okay. So I'll read this poem. It's kind of on interconnection. I also give a prompt, and this is like maybe some homework for you if you want it, which is to write about a memorable conversation you once heard or had. And this is called The Frolicsome Crests and Glistening, with an epigraph by Walt Whitman. What is it then between us? Walt Whitman. There are 20 million pounds of gold suspended in normal seawater, spread out in parts per trillion. Gold is a good conductor of electricity, but seeing how it's sought, I'll bet it's the best conductor of a heart's deepest want. I once had a conversation with my daughter in which she asked, "Do you believe everything is connected?" "That depends," I said. "On what?" she asked. "On whether you're being spiritual or conspiratorial." "Spiritual," she said. "Then yes," I said, "everything is connected." "How can everything be connected spiritually, but not conspiratorially?" she asked. Considering it, I believe the spirit conspires against our errant belief that we are separate. I might be you, you might be me, we might be the living sea with 20 million pounds of gold shimmering, suspended between us, conducting our heart's deepest wants across frolicsome crests and glistening. And what else could it be if not a spiritual conspiracy? That speaks again a little bit to, interconnection and wanting that to be the thing that we teach. Because it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And like you break it all down to atoms, like we're all atoms, we're all interconnected. So this poem in Patriarchy Blues is called Van der Waals Force. And I never know how it lands with scientists because I write about sciencey things, but I'm not a scientist. I understand things in a very superficial way, like with the sciences, but I think that they're fascinating. They're so interesting. Van der Waals Force. You take my hand, look at my fingerprints and ask, did I ever tell you how a gecko sticks to the ceiling? You explain how gecko toes have grooves that turn into a forest of hairs, which have smaller subhairs with the forest of smaller subhairs, and so on until at the very tips are atoms. So the gecko toe and the ceiling atoms are joined, become one, momentarily indistinguishable. And it's so freaky cool, you say. The military has studied it. They've tried, but they can't manufacture anything like that. So that's one that I don't know if that's true, because I've seen that Mission Impossible movie, right? And he's like going up the wall, like, but he's not a gecko. So there was a lot of suspense when I watched Tom Cruise going up that building. There's never any suspense when you watch a gecko going on the ceiling. Okay. So this is an older poem too, answering the question of how the poems have changed. They've changed in like subject matter, but I think voice-wise, they're still the same. This poem was originally called Patriarchy Blues, and then I edited the heck out of this collection, as I mentioned, and I changed it, and now I wish that I had left it alone. So you can over-edit, but I can change it back, because they say that the poem is not done until the poet is dead, so it's still up for, change. So now it's called Nail Salon, originally Patriarchy Blues. The colors shimmer in rows along the walls like springtimes on shrooms, a conundrum conjuring variety glistening like an impossible city. Choice is always a factor in happiness. The more choices we're given, the greater our capacity for dissatisfaction. It's okay, there's always red, but then there they stand. A selection sorted aside, sorted in their suggestion. Snake's tongue, Granny used to call painted nails. Poesis, I say, the name to make the shade. Fishnet stockings red, Freaky Friday nights red, Gypsy girl red, vodka and caviar red, drive church ladies insane with envy red. Catfight red, will somebody please pay attention to me red. All this and still I can't find a shade to fit the statement that I want to make. This predatory capitalist patriarchy is killing me and I'm trying to learn to like it. Why have I never seen that shade in here before? Probably the labels are too small, so they call it Lady Sing the Blues and forget it. These poems are fun to look at again after you've not seen them for a while. And I'll read this poem, a poem from this collection, which is Sublime Subliminal. It's my second book, and it's out on Floating Bridge Press. And I'll just tell you, it's going into a final printing pretty soon, I think. So, you know, act now. Just kidding. But no, it is going into a final printing and it's very exciting. So this poem is called Inner Life of a Water Glass. All these poems are written from a prompt called 20 Little Poetry Projects. And it's an invented form by an Arizona poet named Jim Zimmerman. If anyone wants to look it up, it's a great, great, great form. I loved it. But they include like the name of a famous person and the name of a famous place and a word I'd never heard before, a lot of different factors, foreign language phrase, and I'll explain some of those after I read the poem. Inner life of the water glass. In the darkness of the cupboard, the inner life of the water glass is not empty. It is clean and brimful of paisley animation, smoldering in the emptiness we insist exists between one thing and the next. Have a sip. See if it doesn't taste like thirst or the boozy spike of your imagination. The inner life of a water glass involves no doubts about optimism or pessimism, only dreams of blossoms and the process of emergence from a branch. First the shining nub, then a bud, a green fist holding the pearly petals of a cup, into which dew from clumsy daybreak spills. How does water feel in the absence of the word wet? Dr. Emoto, pour me a glass from a tap in Flint and emote something like pure love into it, until the tintinnabulation of every trickle sings. Be grateful as daybreak is careful with the dispersal of frost and dew, crowning every particle with the gleaming bead or crystal. The inner life of the water glass is thirsty, constantly crying out, get this aquaholic some sky juice, a worthy purpose, a holy drink of that Jordan mouthwash. You see, the water glass is fickle. Clarity requires a biological response. Clarity requires biological intelligence. Ask the sly jellyfish about jettisoning a brain to be clear, to blend in, to mimic water for survival. The jelly will tell you it's hard telling not knowing if you're bringing water to the sea or trying to make a hole in it. My undine of the water glass, sambil minyelam minam ayir, the gone water of doubt mills no more fears. Drink up, twirl in a circle twice. Twice you will have toured the pulsing shoreline of your extraverse. So I think I'll do as I said earlier and tell you the foreign language phrase in there is Malaysian, sambil menyelam minum air, and it means when diving, drink water. The word I had never heard before was undine. Well, I didn't know the meaning of it. There's a street in my town called Undine, and my daughter was like, Mom, what does undine mean? And I was like, well, you know, to dine, to undine. And she's like, no. It's like, yeah. And she's like, you're lying. I was lying. So I looked. It's not what it means at all. It's a water spirit. And the famous person is Dr. Emoto, who is famous for the experiments where he had people like sing to water and then other people yell at the water and then people treat it neutrally, and then it made different shapes and made these beautiful crystalline shapes, the people who sang to their water and prayed to their water. The people who screamed at their water, it just like looked like it was trying to get away from each other under a microscope, under like an electron microscope. Anyway, so they all have these different elements in those poems, but it's kind of funny to go out on that note, but there you have it. So thank you all so much.
Well, thank you again so much, Rena, for being up here tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks again for folks attending from home, from our audience here. And I just want to say in closing, your poetry contains and does so much. There's so much humor in it. There's so much wonder. And there's so many perspectives that are spoken from that deserve to be heard and taken seriously. And so much, I guess I'm just left feeling like your poetry
tells us what we can do and helps us have the attitude to wake up the next morning and do it. It's really, really just wonderful to hear, and I think we've all been really enriched by your poetry tonight.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And for folks at home and everybody else, I feel like her program overshadows me. Talking about our other programs, we have one more virtual program this year. It's a watercolor painting class, so check out our website and cascades.org for that. And please visit to see our upcoming classes for 2023 pretty soon. And let's just have one more round of applause for me. Good night, everybody. Thanks for attending.